So that we can get started on this wonderful, wonderful, I think, an inspiring program, we'd like for I know it's wonderful to network. I've been around, buzzing around, seeing people I haven't seen in 3 years, 4 years, 2 years, 1 month, 1 week, and it's been a lot of fun. But now we have to get going. Good morning. I am Frida Outlaw. I'm the chairperson of the Healthy Nashville Leadership Council. The Healthy Nashville Leadership Council was created by former Mayor Bill Purcell by Executive Order number 25 and has been reauthorized by both Mayors Carl Dean and Megan Barry to mobilize community initiatives to achieve improvement in health. We want to welcome everyone here today to the 8th Annual Healthy Nashville Summit, Nurturing Healthy Brains for a Thriving Community. Over the years, the summit has featured various themes based on the health needs of Nashvillians. However, for the last 2 years, the Healthy Nashville Leadership Council has partnered with ACE Nashville and community patrons to sponsor this summit. This 8th Annual Healthy Nashville Summit is the continuation of the dialogue that we had from last year on how we can work to ensure that all children have an opportunity to excel. Once you build a healthy brain, which was the theme for last year, how do you nurture it so that all children and youth can grow and prosper? The key to a thriving and prosperous community and all of society. We're excited to be building on the science of building healthy brains, which was the theme of the summit again last year, by showcasing, and a lot of our deliberation around choosing this came from input from a lot of you who attended last year, and we thank you very much. Because this is a data-driven kind of process. Most of the time, some of the time it's not. You know, we go off the path a little here and off a little back, but then we come back. So we took very much to heart what you suggested to us last year. Thank you again for that. So what you suggested is the science was great and you learned a lot. And Dr. David Williams from Harvard did a great job in setting the framework for what is important for building healthy brains, also the work of ACE Nashville and a lot of you in this room. But people wanted to know, so what's the innovation, what's the application? So today we're going to be highlighting innovative practices and programs that have been informed by the science of building a healthy brain. We believe you will be inspired by today's presenters to be more engaged, to spread the word, or increase your involvement in this very important work. And like many of you, or all of you, we are committed to all children, and I especially have skin in the game now because I have a granddaughter, and that even increases, you know, at an old age I have a granddaughter, so you appreciate it more. So right now, I want to recognize the committee members of the Healthy Nashville Leadership Council, if any of you are here. Will you please stand up? Thank you. As we participate in the 8th Annual Healthy Nashville Summit, I offer this quote to guide us from Marian Wright Edelman. For some of you who know me, I would love, she is my mentor from, I say afar, because I've only had 2 conversations with her in my life, and she, you know, if you know her, you know they were to the chase. There was no fluff involved in that. And the president and founder of the Children's Defense Fund. This is from a book entitled Prayers and Meditations on Loving and Working for Children. And I actually read it every day so that I can set my own intention about how I want to behave and how I want to be involved. And I hope that you will listen to this and take something from it. Give us strength to work hard, guidance to work effectively, words to inspire and nourish and inform, and I inserted the inform, and a spirit of cooperation for children's greater good. Now, with that, I am going to introduce Dr. Bill Paul, who is the director of Metro Nashville Public Health Department. Dr. Paul has been the director of Nashville's Public Health Department since July 2007, and before coming to Nashville, he served for nearly 15 years at the Chicago Department of Public Health. He's a graduate of Stanford. He earned his MD and Master's of Public Health from the University of Illinois and trained in internal medicine in Wisconsin and infectious diseases in Chicago, and completed a 2-year fellowship as an epidemic intelligence service officer at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And I always think that is a fascinating thing, and I always encourage him to tell a little bit about that. He's had many accomplishments at the Metro Health Department, including public health emergency responses to H1N1 influenza, the flood, and Ebola, and on and on. The multifaceted Nashville Vitality Campaign, which implemented several projects aimed to make healthy living easier in Nashville, including Launch the Bicycle, which was a great thing, because when I would travel around to other cities, especially Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., I would see those bicycles, and I knew people who used them, and I was so excited when we got them, because it meant we were really trending, as the young people say, in the right direction. His leadership helped shape the new Lentz Health Center to be an example of a healthy workplace design, and if any of you haven't seen it, I invite you to come and see it. It is a wonderful space for encouraging workplace health. There are other things that I could say about his accomplishments during this time, including a 9% drop in childhood obesity rates, a 27% increase in breastfeeding initiation rates, and declines in tuberculosis and HIV disease. He's a runner, and he sings in the Nashville Symphony Chorus. I hope to hear you at Christmas time. He and his wife, Tanya, have 3 children. And last year, if any of you were here, how many of you were here last year? Oh, great. We had great return. That means we must have done something right. So we had a famous hand bump, you remember? So we've talked about this year, and I think we're going to move it up a pace. We are going to actually hug. So here we go.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Outlaw. That was a long intro. No, I'm not used to being introduced with a lot of words, but welcome to the 2017 Healthy Nashville Summit. This is the 8th Healthy Nashville Summit, and we'll look at a list in a minute or two, but I don't have that much time, so I'm going to go quickly through the slides. Next. I have the honor of directing the Metro Public Health Department. This is not for you to really try to read everything, but we have a phenomenal mission to protect, improve, and sustain the health and well-being of all people in metropolitan Nashville. And we have fantastic staff at the health department. Many of you here in the room are part of the health department. I'm just grateful to be part of this organization and be part of what we're doing for Nashville. But we know that we can't do it alone. Next. Part of the job is kind of like being the doctor for Nashville, a doctor with one patient, and our patient is doing well. Some things could be better. Nashville is now ranked 7th out of 95 counties in Tennessee, but Tennessee is 44th in the state, in the USA, and everybody knows that the United States does not rank highly in the world in terms of our overall health. Next. And when we define health, we need to define health broadly, not just a state of the absence of disease or infirmity, but complete physical, mental, and social well-being. And that's part of the reason we're here today. Next. One of the roles of the health department, and again, something that we don't do purely alone, is to be a community health strategist, to look at the board in Nashville and look at opportunities for advancing health. Not all the opportunities are at hand all the time, but you've got to look for them, work with people, and try to make things happen. Next. Another really important thing, and I hope most people in the room have heard the river story, is to move upstream, to move from rescuing babies from the river. And this is an actual baby being rescued from an actual river in Nashville, to keeping the babies from falling in the river in the first place. Next. The process we use through Healthy Nashville, it has a name nationally, I guess. It's called Collaborative Community Health Improvement, and it really is gathering people from all different sectors, not just health, around a vision for health, and working together on plans so that our impact is magnified. Next. So the vision for Healthy Nashville is that a Healthy Nashville has a culture of well-being where all people have the opportunity and support to thrive and prosper. Now, does that sound about right for today? I would say yes. Move on. Here's the list of the summits and the dates. Dr. Outlaw did mention the formation of Healthy Nashville, but here is kind of what we've done with the last 8 summits, or 7 summits, and then this one will be the 8th. Next. As Healthy Nashville creates or does a community health assessment and develops a community health improvement plan, it's in a sense it's setting out an agenda for Nashville's health. And right now we're on a community health improvement plan with 3 priorities. One is healthy places. Next. Second is health equity. Well, it says third. Actually, it's probably the most important one. And third, why we're here today, is healthy brains. And so the importance today of understanding adverse childhood experiences and moving from that awareness of the science to practice. Next. So our tasks today, that's what I just said. We've spent a lot of time making each other aware of data and science, but our challenge is moving towards action, building resilience, and in a sense, transforming our systems. Because this isn't all about the health department. It's not all about our kids. It's not all about one agency. It's about Nashville and the children of Nashville and how are we going to make things better for them. I'll give you just a very quick thing. We have every month a child death review for Nashville, and all the agencies that touch on a child, from the hospitals to DCS to schools, broad range of agencies come together. Well, we had a case, and I won't go into the details, but it was a 14-year-old who died, homicide victim. And we went around the table and talked about how this person had interacted with every one of our agencies in some way. And at the end, we learned that this child had been sexually abused. And so the question in the room was, well, what are we going to do different? If this child enters our system now, what's different? How do we keep this baby from falling in the river? How do we prevent adverse childhood experiences from leading to really terrible outcomes? So that's why we're here. Next. Part of the vision of what we're trying to do here is like the vision of Lower Broadway, right? You know, it's not immediately obvious. So Nashville is Music City, and Nashville became Music City not just by the musicians all saying we're going to be Music City. It's by the Chamber of Commerce and the schools and almost every institution and every organization in Nashville saying we're going to be Music City and we're going to make decisions to reinforce our culture as Music City. That's the challenge before us for health. If we succeed in creating healthy conditions everywhere in Nashville, that's what we're going to have to do is make decision after decision at all sectors in our community to slant it towards health and towards the safety of our kids. So that's what I had to say. Now I have the distinct pleasure and honor of introducing Dr. Sue Fort White. For 30 years, Dr. Sue Fort White has mobilized resources for underserved populations, including victims of domestic violence, teens and families in crisis, children in foster care, children and families affected by child sexual abuse. Sue's work at Our Kids is a natural progression of her deep commitment and her desire to create access to programs, services, and opportunities for children and families in need. Our Kids has a table up front here, and congratulations to Sue and to Our Kids for celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. We can do that. Sue's been on the steering committee for ACE Nashville. And personally, I've had the pleasure of working with Sue, and she has really helped to both facilitate and inspire a group that we brought together to look at and transform our community's response to sexual assault and forensic examinations after sexual assault. And we've made great progress, and it has been a great thing to have Sue in the room and to have the experience of our kids in our community to really serve as a model for what we can do and how we can advance. So with no further ado, welcome Sue Fort White.
It's so good to be here together, isn't it? Did you notice that I just had to be outside welcoming people? Because that's what I was doing with my energy, because I feel so thankful and blessed today. So many like-minded hearts and minds are in the room for, I think, what will be a very rewarding experience today. I want to thank Frida Outlaw, who is sort of well, she is a mentor and a dear friend to me. And also sort of a fashionista. So I tried to flow a little bit today, you know, just to keep up a little bit, you know. And I also want to thank Dr. Paul. Both of you have such zeal for children and for families and for making the world a better place. So thank you. Walking on the earth with intention and grace, and most of the time good cheer, is a really great combination. So thank you. Before we go any further, a little housekeeping. There is coffee and water and other things in the back of the room. And as I always tell everyone, honor the messages of your body. If you need to do so, the restrooms are through those doors and to the right. And also, and again, setting the intention and being mindful of where we are and that we are together. Please silence all technology so that we can totally be in the room together. The 2017 Healthy Nashville Summit has been created to build on last year's focus around adverse childhood experiences and the brain science behind the ACE movement. A great deal of thought and planning has gone into creating this summit today. And I want to take a moment to recognize the planning committee, who has worked very hard and I think wisely on the small and large decisions and details. So anyone serving on the planning committee, could you please stand so we can thank you? A lot of it back there in the... Also, thanks to our volunteer photographer, Camille Farmer, who is going to be capturing this moment so that we can, yes, so that we can make it, you know, get some traction and all that. And also, continuing education hours are available. So to sort of make that happen or to ask questions, ask anybody except for me with a red lanyard, because others know the details about that as well. Anyone who knows me understands that I'm forever interested in the diversity of voice and opinion across generations, across everything. And so I'm very excited today that the Metro Health Department has a youth advisory board. And so they embarked on a journey of capturing images that they feel speak to the issue of health equity, So the exhibit out there, they've chosen just a few images. The exhibit is called the Health Equity Photo Voice. So there are going to be some people during breaks and during lunch that will talk to you about it. But I think it's really wonderful that the young people were invited into a space to create visuals around something so important as health equity. Yes, right. Also, this kind of event has been made free of cost because of the generosity of sponsors. So I want to just do a special shout out, share the love with our sponsors and our partners. Our partners today are Healthy Nashville Leadership Council, Monroe Harding, and ACE Nashville. Platinum sponsors are HCA Foundation, Meharry Medical College, and Metro Health Department. Gold sponsors are our kids, yes, Nashville General Hospital at Meharry, and the silver sponsors, Nashville Health, Monroe Carroll Jr. Children's Hospital at Vanderbilt, and bronze sponsors are Tennessee Voices for Children, Prevent Child Abuse Tennessee, Martha O'Brien Center, Tennessee Commission on Children and Youth, and the Family Center. So, also, just a moment about the swag on the table. I'm all into swag, because I like to sort of create something that's going to be a memory of an important moment. And so we just felt like instead of a thumb drive with a lot of stuff on it, we just wanted to get you something about self-care, right? Because we know that everyone in the room has an ACE score, okay, no matter what the number is. And we all know that mitigating anything and helping us really embody our best selves takes self-care. So nobody knows the tune to your self-care. Nobody knows that tune except for you. And so we thought, a coffee mug with a piece of chocolate and a tea bag, right? So as Dr. Paul said to me, he said, yeah, Frida told me that y'all spent almost an entire meeting on what to put in the mug. So, the small things really end up being the big things, right? So the Healthy Nashville Leadership Council asked for the summit to take a deeper dive on ACEs and to examine best practices around the science. And Dr. Frida Outlaw worded it succinctly when she said that this year's summit is about turning the science into service. So I love that. So I'm going to move on to something that I'm very excited about. Our keynote speaker from Boston, Dr. Renee Boynton-Jarrett, beautifully demonstrates just how to do that, turning science into service. Dr. Boynton-Jarrett is also a master multitasker. She is a pediatrician and social epidemiologist and the founding director of the Vital Village Network. She's a parent and advocate. She's an associate professor of pediatrics at Boston Medical Center. She completed her medical degree at Yale University School of Medicine and her doctorate in social epidemiology at Harvard School of Public Health. Her work focused on violence as a life course social determinant of health, specifically the role of early life adversities on health outcomes and violence epidemiology. She's a recipient of a William T. Grant Scholars Award to study the social ecology of violence and its impact on child health outcomes. She's also interested in interventions for children who have been exposed to family and community violence and trauma-informed approaches to care and setting-level interventions. She leads the Health Indicators Task Force for the Boston Defending Childhood Initiative. I'm going to say that one more time. She leads the Health Indicators Task Force for the Boston Defending Childhood Initiative. I love that. And is a member of the Boston Child Wellness Council, both affiliates of the Boston Public Health Commission. Dr. Renee Boynton-Jarrett is someone who understands the power of respecting and dignifying the journey, the healing power of listening deeply, and the hope of collective action. It is pure gift, and we are all so happy. The planning committee was just doing a half gainer off the high dive. When you said yes, unbelievable. It is pure gift to have you with us, and please help me welcome Dr. Renee Boynton-Jarrett.
All right. I am going to keep myself on time because I don't want to interfere with the break. I know we all get grouchy if we don't get our breaks. But thank you so much for welcoming me and having me here at the 8th Annual Healthy Nashville Summit. I am deeply respectful of the hard work that Healthy Nashville and ACES Nashville has done to bring this together. And I hope we would just celebrate them and their hard work by giving them a kindergarten clap. Thank you. But I am also here to celebrate all of you who showed up this morning, who showed up in the room today. I think it doesn't require me saying the work that we are talking about is very difficult work. The collaborative, collective action work takes a lot of additional effort and time. And I am honored to be able to spend the day with a group of champions and leaders who showed up today and who show up every day for the lives of children and families. Most of that work is not acknowledged in the newspapers or by the news media, might not even have a thank you at the end of the day, might be exhausted at the end of the day, but you continue to show up. And so I appreciate you, I want to celebrate you, and if we don't celebrate each other, we can't endure in this work, so thank you. I am also wanting to acknowledge that I don't think it's by accident that this is the 8th Annual Healthy Nashville Summit. If you turn the number 8 onto its side, it looks like the symbol for infinity. And that's what this work is about. It's not going to be 1 year, it's not going to be 2 years. This is changing the culture of how we go about caring for each other, caring for families and communities, and promoting the capacity of communities to promote well-being, right? So most of us in this room who are in a service profession, we're hoping to work ourselves out of a job in the work we're doing today by changing the culture of communities. So I don't have any disclosures. I'm not going to try and sell anything. And I am going to talk very briefly about the biology of stress and certain perspectives on it so that we can go much more deeply into the concept of resilience, take it apart, and see how in some of the programs and practices we're actually using key aspects of resilience in a very intentional way. So, I want to begin with a question. What is resilience? How do you define resilience for yourself? Is this something that we can create? Is resilience something that you can build? Is resilience something you can transform? Keep those questions in mind as we talk today. Because often when we think about resilience, we think about individuals. We think about a resilient person, a resilient individual. And we're going to challenge that paradigm a little bit today as we talk. You know, I bring up the example of the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, that I'm sure you're all familiar with. And you know what? Flint isn't the only place that has challenges with lead in the water. We have plenty of public schools in Massachusetts that the drinking fountains are covered up because the lead levels are too high. So they're not the only one. But I think it's an important example because lead is the most understood chemical neurotoxin for the developing brains of children. We know more about how lead affects development, health, and well-being than we do really about any other chemical neurotoxin. We actually even have a blood test. You can check a lead level to see if it's elevated. So we have tons of evidence. We have policies and practices in place, and we have ways of measuring it. And yet, despite all of this, we had a water crisis in Flint where there were elevated levels of lead. And when we think about it, and we think about our traditional strategies, what could any parent or family in Flint, Michigan have done differently to have prevented harmful exposure to lead? What could any pregnant woman or reproductive age man have done differently? And that's why I bring up the example of Flint, Michigan. Because when we think about childhood adversities and adverse childhood experiences, we actually see a very similar impact on health and well-being over life course and over time as we do of lead exposure in early childhood. But we don't have a blood test that tells you have a toxic level of poverty. We don't have a blood test that tells you you have a toxic level of abuse or neglect. But we have these long-term outcomes. And often our strategies emphasize what individual families can do differently to prevent those adversities for their children. The example of lead brings us quickly to the systems level. It not only takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a village to fail to protect and promote optimal well-being and health outcomes for children. And we absolutely cannot fail to think about how are our systems aligned and how they fail to be aligned in a way that's most effective for preventing toxic social exposures to children. For much of my career, I have focused on the portion of humanity that is exposed to chronic, unrelenting adversity in daily life. And many of you have heard about one of the studies that has helped to really bring a lot of work that's been happening in the background for many years to the forefront, the ACEs study. And I'm not going to review the whole study, but I do want to highlight several key aspects of why it helped bring such national attention to ACEs, and how we can utilize that for policy strategies. The first thing the ACEs study helped us understand, which was a retrospective study over 17,000 members of Kaiser Permanente Health Insurance. This was a group of people who was not a random distribution of the population. They all had health insurance. Most of them had had some college or graduated from college. The sample was diverse, but it was predominantly Caucasian, predominantly middle income or above. And they found that ACEs were relatively common. Exposure to adversity between the ages of 0 and 18 were relatively common. Over 57% reported at least one. And they didn't ask about everything. They didn't ask about poverty or housing insecurity and things we know to be true social determinants of health as well. They asked about exposure to emotional, physical, sexual abuse. They asked about exposure to a family member who's suffering from significant mental illness. The other thing the ACEs study helped us understand was when they summed the number of ACEs that you were exposed to, those who had 0 ACEs versus those who had 4 or more, on average had a life expectancy of 18 years less. And when they looked at a number of health outcomes, they saw the same consistent pattern. As the number of ACEs you were exposed to increased, your risk for chronic conditions and early morbidity and mortality increased. And so these patterns are alarming. And it causes us to think a little bit about how we understand trauma and why. And a lot of our early understanding of trauma really came from understanding veterans as they came home from war, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is not only an event or series of events, but it's circumstances that are experienced by someone, an individual, that have a lasting adverse effect on their well-being. The circumstances are experienced by the individual as emotionally or physically harmful. So it's not just the event itself, it's the experience of that event by the individual that has a lasting effect. So let's talk a little bit more about that. So as we see this impact of adverse childhood experiences on such a range of different types of health outcomes, what would explain that pattern? We now have lots of stories on the news talking about ACEs and kind of think we understand what's going on, but do we really? Why would there be an abiding risk from early childhood adversities that could affect such a different range of experiences? So Hans Cieli, who is one of the people who helped us understand how our body responds to stress, what we would call the fight or flight response, said something interesting. He said, it's not the stress that kills us, but our reaction to it. And this is really important to think about. So, one reason why adversities could affect so many different outcomes is that as you're developing, if you experience an adversity at a critical stage in your development, it can throw a number of things onto a different course. A second thought would be that early disadvantage is associated with later disadvantage. Something difficult happens, you don't perform as well as in school, you don't graduate from school, it leads to kind of a chain of adversities. Second pathway. The third pathway, and the most invisible or insidious pathway, and the one that I think probably accounts for most of what we see in adulthood, is that early experiences are indirectly related to later exposures and later conditions. So the full and worst impact of the adversity is not what we see immediately following the adversity. It is what happens if that adversity is not nurtured, supported, acknowledged, addressed, and treated with appropriate, timely, therapeutic resources. So if I fell off this stage and broke my leg, you all would come running, you'd call an ambulance, you'd make sure I got to the hospital and my leg was set and healed and I moved forward. But we don't do that with emotional wounds. If I'm here speaking with you all and I have a broken heart, you might know that I'm sad, you might sense it with your intuition, but we're not necessarily going to respond to it in the same way that we would a physical injury. And so I might walk through life with an emotional limp that was never fully addressed. What happens over time? So Cieli's first paper was on stress and the general adaptation syndrome, adaptive responses. It's important to think about. So let's simulate this a little bit. You're at the corner, checking your cell phone, seeing what time it is, checking a text message, and then all of a sudden you just hear brakes, and this Mack truck is about to hit you. You can tell it's a heavy truck, you can hear the screeching brakes, you smell the fuel from the engine. You're no longer thinking about that text message. Your body is perfectly designed to switch focus exclusively to survival. Heart rate jumps, you're trying to figure out the best possible strategy to get to safety. And if you survive that experience, but you truly believed your life was in danger, the next time you see the same kind of truck as you're kind of pushing your cart from the supermarket, you might actually have a flashback of that experience of almost being hit by the truck. Your heart might start to beat a little bit faster. You might sweat a little bit. You might not only have a memory, but you might have a physiological response as well. But that's not the only thing that changes. you might actually decide you don't want to cross in front of that truck, even though you know it's parked. You know it's not the same truck that almost hit you, but you might double check that it's parked before you cross it, or you might take a longer route to your car. So we see 3 different ways that a life-threatening experience would affect you months, years later. Change your behavior, lead to a physiologic response, lead to a flashback or a memory. So then I say, well, this is your route to school. Cross this 7-lane highway. No crossing guard, no bridge, no stoplight. This is your route to school every day, back and forth. You know? So we all know 10-year-olds that probably can make it across that highway. Maybe some of us could as well. But you know, the first time you cross that highway, it's going to be extremely stressful, and your body will mount an extreme response. But if that's your route to school every day, back and forth, year in and year out, it's just your route to school. Your body simply cannot mount the same response day in and day out when you live with chronic, ongoing, unrelenting adversity. And in fact, you wouldn't think to mention it to a teacher or a parent or a doctor or a social worker because it's normal. This is where you live. And actually, you're aware that the adults know that this is your route to school as well. Policymakers know. The care providers know. The clinicians know. Right? And so over time, your adaptation can underperform. Your body simply cannot continue to mount the same response over and over. So this is what we'd call allostatic load. Your body is designed to maintain allostasis, to adapt to your environmental conditions. But if they are overwhelmingly toxic, you simply can no longer respond appropriately. So the bell goes off and you hit the floor because you're hypervigilant, on edge, focused on survival. Or you have an exam and you fall asleep during the exam because you simply can't mount enough of a stress response to stay awake for it. And the importance is, it's not just the events, it's how you perceive them, how helpless you feel, how threatened you feel. And this is why exposures at different developmental stages for children have different impacts. Exposures have different impact depending on the environmental context that helps them understand that experience and heal from it. The other thing we have to think about is what we call biological sensitivity to context. This is what I call the first day of kindergarten effect. We all have those kids who on the first day of kindergarten roll into the classroom, no problem. It's stressful. They don't know anybody. They've not met that teacher before. They've not been in that school or classroom before. But even though it's high stress, their reactivity is low. So they're like dandelions, right? They'll just grow wherever they can grow and nothing's really going to stop them. You don't need to water them, fertilize them. They'll endure. But then we have what we would call the orchid child, right? Who even in February, still getting choked up when getting dropped off at school, tears welling in their eyes. You know, it's no longer as stressful, but they're still having a really high reaction to it, right? So these are individual differences. But with the right transition, the right support from the caregiver and the teacher, maybe a transitional object or a process, that orchid child can do incredible. So this is another dimension of what we have to think about when we see such a range of different responses from kids to what we would consider the same experience, the same stressful event. Then we have to think about intergenerational pathways. So a child who's exposed to adversities grows up, may have a higher risk for hypertension or diabetes. But now that woman is pregnant. So what is the risk increase to her unborn child? Risk for preterm birth? Risk for lower birth weight? How does that affect, over time, the growth trajectory and developmental trajectory of that unborn child and her ultimate outcomes? So then we also have to think about intergenerational patterns of transmission. And up until now, I have focused exclusively on the individual's experience of trauma and stress. And as a society, we understand trauma and stress best from an individual perspective, in part because of one of the most sentinel features of trauma, which is that you feel profoundly isolated and alone in that experience. But we also know that trauma is not just an individual experience, and that there can be community traumas. I work in Boston, and when the earthquake happened in Haiti several years ago, many of my patients were separated from their families who still lived in Haiti and were severely affected by that earthquake, even though they were very far from the epicenter of the actual event. And as a community, we can really suffer and experience as a community a traumatic event. So we know trauma is not just an individual experience. We know the neighborhoods you live in truly matter in terms of the resources to help kids respond and recover from trauma. So when we think about our community environments, we think about equitable opportunities, we think about the place and the built environment, and we think about the people who are there. So how does trauma affect that? Well, what happens over time when there's chronic underemployment, chronic poverty, chronic underinvestment in a neighborhood? What happens over time when there are dilapidated, unsafe spaces that aren't repaired in terms of your use of that physical space? What happens to social cohesion when there's repeated violent incidents that occur? So trauma can affect all of these dimensions of the community and affect the functioning and wellness of the community. So let's look at a specific example if we think about homicide. Well, what happens, oops, it's not showing up, but if we think about what homicide does to social cohesion, well, what impact does that have on parenting practices? If a child doesn't behave, doesn't follow the rules, goes to an area of town they're not supposed to go, what is the disciplinary practice? What is the degree of stress that the parent experiences? And how does this affect cognition, mental health, and well-being for children, even though they may not have been exposed to that homicide? How does the characteristics of living in a neighborhood with low trust and cohesion and high-stakes parenting stress affect their growth and development? So we know for kids that there are physiological, there are emotional and behavioral, there are cognitive impacts of experiencing trauma on their memory, on their aggression, on their hypervigilance. We see social impacts on their attachment, and we see emotional impacts as well. So trauma affects many dimensions of well-being for kids. And when we think about the work that we do, we always think about these common areas that are undermined by traumatic experiences: safety, trust, power, and control. And you'll see as I present some of the work we're doing, we're always dealing with reestablishing a sense of safety, reestablishing trust, and being aware of power and control dynamics and how trauma has impacted those. We also know that there's historical trauma in communities, things that have happened to communities of people over generations that are not just wiped away because we're in the modern day, but have had a legacy on how those communities have developed over time. We know segregation has had an impact on how schools have developed over time. Although schools are desegregated now, what is the history of investment in that school? We know redlining and practices that have segregated neighborhoods have had an impact on how communities have developed and been invested in over time. We know major events such as the Holocaust have had a profound impact on groups of people and how they have grown and developed over time. So we can't avoid thinking about historical traumas as well. Which brings us back to our original questions around resilience. Can it be built? Can it be transformed? Can it be created? So when we think about resilience, a common way of thinking about it is a human capacity to face, to overcome, to be strengthened by, or transformed by adversities of life. And initially, our understanding of resilience was focusing on it as an individual trait. There are children who were born resilient, and they were resilient to adversities. We then changed and began to think more about the relationship between the environmental context that children lived in and that developed their resilience. And we've now broadened that even further to think about resilience not as just an individual characteristic, but as a characteristic that's really informed and shaped by the web of relationships and environmental context that surrounds that child. So we know for kids to be resilient, they have to feel safe, lovable, and capable. And there's a complex interplay between the child, their social supports, and their societal resources that influence that. I would also argue that resilience is not a single thing. If we think about the industrial literature, resilience is your ability to adapt to different conditions, your ability to withstand adverse conditions, and your ability to recover from. So when we think about building community capacities, we think about building capacity to support all of these aspects of resilience. In fact, everything we really know from evidence about how resilience is transformed has nothing really to do with the individual child themselves. It has to do with the type of parenting, the type of social support, the mental health of the caregivers, routines and skills, and the understanding of trauma by the caregivers in their lives, as well as community assets and capacities. So evidence of how we build resilience, actually most of it is around things that exist outside of the child. And that makes sense because we know an individual is nested in their families, as well as their communities, as well as our policies. So we don't really need to struggle with the question of whether resilience is an individual or collective factor. It's both. And so as we think about strategies to build resilience, we want to be mindful of each of these levels. Community resilience level, the familial resilience level, and the individual resilience level. For the individual, how are we supporting their social supports and coping? For the familial level, how are we supporting two-generation strategies? And for the community level, how are we really supporting a socio-cultural environment that understands trauma and can respond to it appropriately? So this is all great information, but what are the real practical, actual strategies, and where do we go from here? So I want to suggest 6 strategies, and I want to kind of go with a trust exercise in a sense that some of these strategies are disruptive, and they are intentionally so. They intentionally disrupt the way we would normally approach things. So I'm going to ask, are you willing to be disturbed? Are you willing to do things differently? Because I think one thing is clear, we don't just need to do more programming. We are not going to work our way out of this or work our way towards health and well-being with more programming alone. We have to work together differently, which is what collective impact and actions are about. So it should feel uncomfortable and it should feel different than what you're doing in the past. But we know it's worth it. We know there's a higher level of vulnerability in early childhood because of the developing brain. So the impact of adversities is profound. At the same point in time, we know there's a huge opportunity because kids can rebound, can recover, and if they get access to appropriate early intervention, appropriate therapeutic services, they will do well. So kids are the canary in the coal mine in many ways as we think about resilience and adversity. And as was shared earlier, we also have to think about the difference between equality and equity. Thinking about historical trauma, thinking about community trauma, thinking about things that exist outside of the individual family. In order to achieve equity, we may have to do different things in different communities to account for the long-standing histories. So I would encourage you to change your question from what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And the question of what happened to you is a paradigm-shifting question. Trauma-informed approaches, as encouraged by SAMHSA, need to increase awareness so that we realize how common trauma is. We have to help create an environment and culture where everyone can recognize signs and symptoms of trauma and that we can respond appropriately. So the first strategy is to do what you're already doing, which is increasing alignment across sectors. You know, we know that systems of care operate in silos, but that protective factors for families actually overlap strongly. So how do we do differently? We know and have talked about trauma symptoms as adaptations, an adaptive response to environmental conditions. So if we fail to work together to reestablish social safety and social connections that are fundamental to healing, the best laid interventions will simply not have the impact that they could. So we have to work together. We have to coordinate opportunities for promoting prevention, transforming, and enhancing neighborhoods. So our work locally with Vital Village, we formed as a network simply because there were a lot of great programs out there, but we didn't talk together, we didn't work together, we weren't coordinating and aligning our efforts to improve well-being. And we have two primary focuses. The first is to build community capacity to promote healthy social and emotional development in early childhood. And the second asks that paradigm-shifting question. What if we used a trauma-informed lens? What if we didn't develop new programs? What if we used a trauma-informed lens to enhance the existing programs that were already there? What if we decided trauma is not a special mental health only word, but that an understanding of trauma and the long-standing impact of trauma is important for everyone? And so that's been our approach, working on enhancing existing efforts by bringing a trauma-informed lens to the framework. So we really think about catalyzing collaborations. We always lead by listening with an orientation that expects that there are solutions that already exist within communities that perhaps haven't been elevated, scaled, or spread. Rather than thinking we'll come in with a solution, we expect to find that there's a solution there already that we have to look for and listen to. What are parents already doing? What ingenuity already exists? What have teachers already figured out? How do we build on that? And then we foster collaboratives and cross-sector coalitions based on that. And we use an orientation around continuous improvement. We never have a perfect program. We're absolutely never done. We'll keep transforming it and improving it. So a lot of what we do is we think about our awareness raising as creating momentum to help sustain these efforts long time. We think about a community of practice that supports learning so that people feel safe in trying new things and spreading these efforts. And we think about scale right? We think about what will it take to really bring these programs to scale. And for us, that's civic engagement. It's beyond the service provider footprint alone. That is engaging every member of the community and empowering members of the community to take on leadership in this work. And you can't start too small. You start at the right spot. So if aligning systems is what you're ready to do, that's great. But if that's not what you're ready to do, you can start by having different programs work together in a collaborative way across sectors. So we started at a very small level and found that that was able to scale up pretty quickly. The second strategy is what we're already doing to invest early in parents and young children. So we know developmental progress requires stable, responsive relationships. But who is not at the table? Who are we not investing in? Who are we not supporting? Who are we missing? For me, as a primary care pediatrician, I often talked almost exclusively to moms, even when dads were present. Asked most of my questions to moms. I'm embarrassed to say this, but it's how I was trained, and it's how we're oriented in a lot of our works. And I don't know how many dads in the room have gone to pediatric visits and felt maybe a little bit ignored. And that's a problem. So let's think about it. We also don't see dads' engagement sometimes, right? And so what do we see, and what do we think about that? So if we see inconsistencies in parenting, if we see absences in parenting, we think maybe neglect, maybe abandonment, maybe just a lack of responsibility or commitment. But we just talked about ACEs, right? So do we ever consider ACEs that the parents experienced, right? Do we think about how the birth of a child might be very triggering for a dad who's experienced ACEs? Do we see vulnerability or hurt? Do we think that there may be concerns about stereotypes, fear, shame, PTSD? Where are there spaces for dads to get healing for the intimate partner violence that they witnessed as a child? Where are there spaces for dads to receive prenatal care and support? Who screens dads for prenatal depression? Postnatal depression? Who checks and see if they're taking care of themselves, if they have high levels of stress, if they're taking care of their blood pressure? We have a whole prenatal care process that pretty much excludes dads. So when we start to think about this, we start to think about all the cultural reasons that this happens, some around thoughts about masculinity. But it wouldn't be impossible for us to actually address this. And, I'm not the first person to talk about this. This is something we've been well aware of, but we've done very little to address. So I have a colleague who runs an organization called Fathers Uplift, who's developed a concept called pre-father care, and has really thought about how, thank you. Yeah, no. And is that a revolutionary thing to do? It's taking care of the mental health needs of fathers during the prenatal period. And often when we talk about this, many women think about their husbands and how they behaved during pregnancy and delivery, and it's like light bulbs going off. But we don't create spaces for men to receive the healing that they might need in order to enter fatherhood with the best possible well-being for themselves, most prepared. So just thinking about, if we understand ACEs, we understand the commonality, we think about it, how do we change what we're doing and how we're working with parents, considering that they were once children? The second thing is thinking about clinical innovations and redesign. Right? So we bring trauma-informed frameworks to every aspect of care. One of the places where we found it most successful is group well childcare, primarily for the reasons that I talked to you about. But we don't do it from evidence-based wisdom only. We have expert feedback, we look at evidence base, but we also deeply engage parent feedback and parent leadership in designing and helping to enhance this model. And the parent feedback has been remarkable because we talked about adversities, right? We talked about the ability to withstand, to adapt, and recover. Many of the families we work with have chronic housing insecurity. We have a huge housing crisis in the Boston area. That housing insecurity is not going to go away anytime soon. It's not going to get solved. It's not going to get wiped away. Intergenerational poverty is not going to go away overnight. So we do a lot around toxic stress and adversities, which is wonderful, but you raise that awareness for parents, and then they're living with a chronic ongoing adversity. So they pushed back on that and said, well, you're going to have to talk more about how we now, with this knowledge of what toxic stress does to our developing children's brains, how do we exist with an adversity that's not going to get solved? And so that was incredibly important for how we actually end up framing the program. So parents are critical. They have to be involved in designing and developing these programs. We have to think about our moral and professional obligation. You know, there is more and more interest in screening for social determinants of health. There's more and more interest in screening for adverse childhood experiences. We cannot stop with screening. We have to think about ways of doing this in ways that are patient and family-centered. We have to think about universal precautions approaches to trauma-informed care. This has to be conducted in a way that maintains dignity and respect for parents, and we have to not just target particular groups because we know trauma is common. So we'll be missing a lot of people if we think we can tell who's been exposed to trauma in advance. So we have to think about that. We have to, even when we don't have all of the evidence-based answers, we have to use the evidence we already have to think about modifiable resilience factors and how we can incorporate them into our practice. We don't want to reinvent wheels of power and control for our families. We want to be strong advocates. The third strategy really thinks about ways to provide professional development for educators. To not forget that kids spend a large portion of their time in schools and in childcare with caregivers who care about them, who have to deal with the emotional dysregulation and the hardships that come with traumatic experiences. So we can't forget to develop and support those professionals. We know we've had a long history of education and discipline and disciplinary practices in education. We're not going to review all of it, but there are 3 key insights that have come out of it. 1, mandatory suspensions for disruptive behaviors, zero tolerance policies haven't really worked very well, right? We know trauma is linked to academic performance. We know trauma affects executive functioning, memory, cognition, as well as your behavior within classrooms. And there are insights from neuroscience about how to understand the roots of these disruptive behaviors and how to extinguish them. So I had to sit down and really, really think about it. Why is trauma associated with learning and school performance? I know it's associated with disruptive behavior, memory, and cognition, but why? And if we could really think about why, would that influence our approach to responding to challenging behaviors? So the traditional approach thinks that disruptive behaviors are volitional. A child decided not to behave. They're defying rules. So we say, if you don't do X, Y will happen. A contingency-based strategy will work if it's a volitional behavior, if you're deciding to do it. But the new science is teaching us something different. A child who's been exposed to trauma may have difficulty reading social cues, understanding social interactions. Trauma limits higher order thinking because you are highly focused on fear and safety. So that actually, when you're thinking about talking to a child about if you do this, then this will happen, they actually have to use their higher brain to do that. And if they're being triggered by their lower brain, that strategy isn't going to work. So when we think about this, we don't have to get too far into the brain, but we'll just do a little bit of it, right? This is your subcortical brain, and this is your cortical brain. This is your higher order thinking. This part of your brain is keeping you all sitting nicely in your seats without talking. It's like this is all of your higher order thinking that's controlling all this wonderful social behavior. If we went into a kindergarten classroom, they'd be running around, jumping, doing different things, right? Because you're triggered by a different part of your brain. But this emotional regulation center of your brain has to work optimally in order for your higher order thinking to happen. That's why social emotional regulation is so important to learning new skills and learning new things. So the other part is that the different hemispheres of the brain have to communicate. So sometimes you ask a kid, what happened? Why did you hit so-and-so? And they actually can't remember, or they can't articulate that for you. Well, kids with trauma have difficulty with this highway. It's not as well developed. So they have a hard time connecting to certain language to respond and explain questions. It's not just that they're being bad, but these are also things that are related to trauma in the brain. So we know that when kids are exposed to an unsafe, scary environment in early childhood, adversity, lack of stable, secure warmth and caregiving, this part of the brain biases itself towards fear and threat. So you become more concerned with safety and threat than other things. And that affects this development of the rest of the brain. And if you think about it, this is how your brain develops over time. So the brain really develops from the bottom up. And so if this part doesn't develop optimally, the rest does not develop optimally. When you're born, your brain is not like your thumb. When kids are born, they have just a teeny tiny thumb, but it has all the same parts that my thumb has right now, right? And the brain isn't like that. When you're born, your brain is still partially unformed, and it's the social experiences you have that help formulate that brain. So if you're exposed to a lot of irregularities, a lot of fear, a lot of adversity, your brain simply doesn't develop as well as it would have otherwise. So we had to think about what teachers aren't learning, what teachers aren't getting to support them. Are they getting education and training about the impact of trauma on learning and how trauma presents? And that's what teachers told us was missing. So we really worked on building toolkits and curriculum that could be infused into their classrooms in partnership with teachers, not to target kids who'd been exposed to trauma, but to help the entire class have better language and regulation of behavior, and build a classroom culture that understood why kids have big emotions and challenging emotions. A lot of this, that we call the foundational principles of trauma-sensitive schools are the same things that we're talking about already, building a sense of community and building the capacity of educators to truly respond appropriately to kids. It's a small group of kids at the top that are going to need intensive interventions. Yes, they will. And some are going to need more specific supports. But we have to make sure every single provider has access to appropriate ongoing professional development and training in how trauma affects learning. The fourth strategy is self-care. the thing that usually gets left off the list. So I'm looking for a job where I can slowly lose sight of why I originally set out to do with my life with benefits. None of us do this, but this is kind of what happens if we don't take care of ourselves. This is very hard. There can be vicarious trauma. Burnout is very real because it's emotionally exhausting at times, particularly if you don't have a system or you're working within a system that doesn't adequately support the work that you're doing with children. Over time, you can become detached and depersonalized, and that's a self-protective strategy that would happen. And that reduction in accomplishments. So we have to absolutely say that we matter and care about ourselves. We have to absolutely, I'm sorry, this didn't come up, but you absolutely have to think about different ways of self-care. Culture between peers to help with self-care instead of just kind of venting, actually proactively debriefing with peers, having a reflective practice around difficult situations that have happened, and really working to take care of self-care. So when we know better, we do better. And the final strategy is really around systematically supporting improvement. One of the things we've tried to do is create more drop-in spaces to support social emotional well-being for parents and newborns, as well as breastfeeding support. We have a coalition that's full of diverse providers doing very, very different things. But importantly, these drop-in groups are all led by volunteers in the community who are supported through certifications and training, and then bring their ideas to the table for the best strategies to outreach and connect with families. So our goal is to build the capacity of the cities. We've also worked on a data platform where we're bringing a lot of existing information that's already there into the same shared space and sharing that with families, policymakers, and educators so that we transparently as a community can look at our outcomes together and make decisions about needs. We look at ways of thinking about opportunities in neighborhoods to promote child well-being. This is what we call the Child Opportunity Index that's out of the Kirwan Institute. Areas that are light are very low opportunity, and areas that are darker are higher opportunity, and the green bubbles are violent crime in the neighborhoods. So we're also using these models to talk about opportunity structure and crime as well. So you all know this work is incredibly challenging and difficult. We like to say we're better together. If we can figure out how to row together, if we can figure out how to work together, our impact is much larger than any one impact alone. And I don't know if the video will show up, but I don't know if you've ever seen groups of starlings flying. These are groups of birds that fly in formation. And this is what they do when a hawk is trying to get one of them. So you could decide that, why do this? Why spend all of this energy in becoming this very large, flying, amorphous thing? Why not just let the hawk get one of the birds? And then how do they fly like this without bumping into each other? And so scientists have actually studied this group behavior, and they find that each bird pays attention to the three birds on either side of it. So they're paying attention to a small group of birds, but together they can end up flying in this huge formation and protect themselves from predators. So I would argue that this is what communities do also. This is what coalitions do also. This is not a behavior that is of any one bird. This is the behavior of a group. And we have many examples in history of how groups have led to major social change. I think we've been too polite about adversities in childhood and child well-being. The brain science is absolutely clear. We have more evidence about what is needed to improve outcomes for kids in early childhood than we have for most things. We have more evidence for why adversity is a major problem, not just for childhood, but for your development across your life course and for our society's well-being in general. Why are we not tapping in to our ability to work as a collective to get more done? And I think, this proverb, when spiders unite, they can tie down a lion, is very, very true. But it's hard when you feel like you're the only spider. That's why hanging in the coalitions is so incredibly important. The coalition work is very difficult, and it sometimes feels like you're not getting anywhere. But we have to believe that as a group, we are able to do something that's more than the sum of each of us as individuals. This collective has a different property. Martin Luther King said that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. And I get exhausted sometimes with this work. It's so difficult, and sometimes we get disappointed. And I think about 15 years from now, 30 years from now, 50 years from now. What are they going to say about us? About everything we know about brain science, about public health, about child well-being? All of the information that we know about what kids need to thrive and what we did with that information. And I just decided that I want to be able to tell my grandkids that I tried my very, very best. I worked really hard, because I know history will judge us harshly based on what we know right now and what we're doing. And that always gives me a deeper portion of strength and motivation. Being in rooms like this, where you all show up at 8:30 in the morning because you want to make a bigger difference, reminds me that we can and we will. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions if folks have them. Or, yes, there's a question. Go for it.
So, I'm a nurse. I'm a nurse. How would you say in your work, like a coalition, building a coalition, and this work is across different sectors. So that's one of the biggest challenges and struggles. So in the midst of all of us who are very busy doing all of our work, what would be your advice coming from kind of where you are? I think that would just be helpful and encouraging.
Absolutely. So when I started in this work, I went to tenant association meetings. I sometimes went to community organizing meetings. I felt really out of place. I was trained medically like you. I didn't really think I had anything to offer, but I just came and I was listening, and I wanted to be helpful. I think you would be amazed at how much your presence validates the work that people are doing when you cross sectors. Someone with different training coming, sitting at your round table and saying, I want to help support what you're doing. I don't have a grant. I don't have an agenda. I don't have a study I'm trying to do. I want to support your work. That is incredibly motivating to people, and you would be amazed at what you have to offer just by bringing a slightly different perspective to the table. What I found in doing that work is that many people felt like I did. They had gone into the work that they went into because they wanted to make a very big difference in the lives of children, and it was becoming clear to them that being trapped only in a clinical setting was simply not good enough. Because when I saw child abuse, it had been going on for a very long time. So I needed to get out there to childcare workers and teachers and other folks who would notice that a child was less confident or quiet. Maybe they didn't have evidence of abuse or neglect, but they noticed a change early on in the child, so we were much more at the earlier stages of prevention. And so if that's responding. Yes, sir.
That question was asked, how about CPR?
Community-based participatory research, I think, is amazing and has been underutilized in collective impact work. I mentioned that we are doing ongoing, continuous quality improvement using improvement science. We were unable to do that work until we started to infuse CBPR practices because it wasn't clear how to make decisions. You have this person with this degree sitting next to this person who works in the home, sitting next to this person, and we're gonna make a collective decision on X, Y, and Z. Just because you invite community members to the table does not erase the years and years of feeling like their story doesn't matter. So you need a process, and CBPR provides a lot of resources for collective decision-making and more equitable decision-making and paying attention to power dynamics. None of us want to admit they exist, but you can't erase your training, your degrees, your experience you bring to the table. How do you elevate and create an equitable playing field where other types of wisdom matter and maybe matter more? So the biggest mistake I made when I went to Boston was I ran out to community meetings and I was like, have you seen this article? And do you know about this evidence-based practice? And I've been, oh, sorry, this is my little timer. I've been studying this forever and I have so much to offer. And everyone was like, great. No, everyone was like, please shut up. Like, it was just like, who is this person? And I couldn't understand what I was doing wrong. I was so enthusiastic, I wanted to make a difference, and I just couldn't get it. And I was like, well, everyone's just very political, and they don't want to work together, and X, Y, and Z. It wasn't that at all. I missed the boat entirely. And if you've been to your doctor recently, you probably don't think we're good listeners. I had forgotten to just show up to listen with nothing else but to listen and to learn from. And that has built so much trust, long-standing relationships, years and years of wonderful, productive work together. So sometimes you just have to show up with no other agenda and be willing to do things that don't sound like things that you would have thought to do. So there are a lot of things we do in our network that would not have been my idea, but I'm committed to trusting the process. Yes, sir.
What has been your experience with the faith-based communities and whether it's been a help or a hindrance?
Okay, so in Boston, we have something called the Boston Miracle. We had high rates of community violence that went down dramatically, and we called it the Boston Miracle. And nobody knows why. But there was a 12-point coalition that was formed by faith-based communities that was a huge part of this effort, as well as the public health department, as well as the police department, as well as a lot of enrichment and other activities that were happening for kids summer in school. So there are in communities and community capacity building, institutions are absolutely important, and the faith-based community is absolutely fundamentally central and needs to be integrated. There are power dynamics there as well. Political power dynamics, social power dynamics. There needs to be a process for talking about that as well, because that can also, as much as it can create opportunities, it can create barriers if we're not fully talking about it. But community institutions are a huge part of transforming communities, whether they be schools, faith-based communities, community organizations that have existed for long periods of time. This is the mesosystem that supports families and can have a very big impact. And obviously for communities, African American communities that didn't have access to the political system for many years, the faith-based community evolved in a different way around political power. So this is, again, as we talk about historical trauma, we're not bringing it up to make anyone feel bad. It's a reality. If we're trying to figure out what we're doing now, we have to understand why things evolved in the way that they did, so we don't undermine or disrupt something that is there for a purpose. Yes, ma'am. I think so. We can make it available, I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure we can make it available. Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you all so much. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, so we have, like many cities, we have a couple of collective impact initiatives that operate in parallel sometimes and collaboratively sometimes. That can be hard. It's a reality of what we're trying to learn how to do around collective impact. One thing a mentor taught me is that stay focused on what's in the best interest of children. This mentor ran the Child Witness to Violence Project, where many of the families they worked with had intimate partner violence that they were dealing with, and it became really tricky about engagement of dads and other things like that. But if you could stay focused on the best interest of children, you could always kind of figure out a strategy. The same thing with intimate partner violence becomes very tricky around child abuse reporting as well. So that was another critical bridge. So I take that into the work that I'm doing, because sometimes I have a personal feeling about someone venturing off or trying to do something maybe that seems similar, but sometimes we need to try different things in order to innovate, right? We need to try a couple different things. So I try to keep in mind what is it going to take for us to really make a difference for kids in this community, and we try to align whenever we can based on them. Unfortunately, we have poor outcomes for our kids. We have a lot of programs, and we have very poor outcomes. So there's more than enough work to go around. Fortunately, we can't, stand in the way of an effort that maybe is going to be helpful. All right, I should let you all get a break, but I'll be here for the day, and I'm happy to talk more. Thank you so much.
Oh, my word. I am so excited. There's a sense of urgency, certainly be over-the-moon inspiration, and there does need to be disruption. You're exactly right. One thing I want to say before we break is that in relation to the nurse that talked about where do I plug in and what does that look like? Nashville is a vibrant and generous spirited city. We have so many resources, and we have a relatively new movement afoot, which is called ACE Nashville. And so there are over 200 organizations across sectors already very vibrantly involved. And so there's going to be more of that, which reminds me, please, if you did not sign up at the front when you came in, please do that, because we want we want to stay in touch with you about ACEs and ACE Nashville and other learning opportunities. And also, this is a little bit out of my cognitive zip code, but for you social media buffs, the event hashtag is hashtag Healthy Nashville Summit 2017 and Science to Service. Hashtag Science to Service. I love that. Okay, so come back in 10 minutes and, enjoy your break. We need to come back in the room so that we can be deployed surgically and strategically to our breakout sessions. So, okay, here we go. Here we go. Okay, so as you know, we have 4 breakout sessions. So you get to choose one this morning and one after lunch, and they're all wonderful. So I'm going to start with the people that are interested in the Trauma Smart Building Resilience in Communities with Kelly Evans. That workshop will stay here. And what we're asking you to do is come forward and center so that you're not, so that it's just more of a sense of, snugging up, Okay, so the second one is trauma-informed care policy and procedure changes that best support family unit. This is presented by Catherine Sinback, who is the court administrator here in Davidson County for Juvenile Court. They have absolutely transformed that court system. It's going to be fascinating. And they are meeting on this level out the doors in the chapel to the left. So Heather, the people that want to go to that breakout session to hear about how juvenile court is really being transformed, please follow Heather. Heather, where are you? Is that you? Okay, that's Amanda. So go there. Okay, so we're gonna pause right now. So for people that want to go to that breakout session that's in the chapel through those doors over there, please go ahead and start mobilizing. Okay. Good. Okay, so the next 2 workshops are going to be convened on the lower level. So if you can take the stairs, we encourage you to do that. If you need to use the elevator, there is an elevator across from the chapel, so through those doors and to the left. So this next group, those who are interested in building healthy brains, the role of life experience in shaping brain development. This is presented by Alex Batts, and we're very excited about this. This presentation provides a cogent and fascinating look at brain science and the impact of toxic stress. So those who are interested in that, please follow Jennifer Trail to classroom 1. Jennifer, where are you? Okay, back out there, she's waving her hands. Okay, so that is building healthy brains. And there's a pause in the action. The fourth breakout is moving the needle toward ACEs-informed school culture and practices in Metro Nashville Public Schools, presented by Mary Cinnabuori and Matthew Portell, who is the principal at Fall Hamilton Elementary. That's also going to be an amazing breakout session. So those who are interested in being a part of that, please, I think Amanda is going to be taking you down. Amanda's got the red jacket on, and it's going to be held in a space called The Well on the lower level. So those of you who are staying in this space for the please come sort of forward and center so that Kelly can really connect. All of these workshops will be about 1 hour, and please come back in here when it's over. Thank you. So how are y'all doing? How y'all doing right now? Yes, yes. I'll tell you something. Renee Boynton Jarrett really got me excited. And then I went to Mary Cinnabore's breakout session, and I was like, I'm just gonna, do a hydroplane someplace. Okay, so you notice that we had this beautiful, healthy food, and this year we had dessert, so I hope Dr. Paul doesn't fuss at us, but I enjoyed my banana pudding, because that's part of my self-care regimen, Yes, banana pudding is good. We're talking comfort food. And again, I want to say, thanks to our generous sponsors, you got some swag, people, so don't forget your coffee mug with your tea bag and your chocolate, because we want you to take care of yourselves. Because Renee's pointed out, we're doing some hard work. We really need to do self-care, and so we can be strong and courageous and encouraged. Okay, so this is, we're moving into a really special time in the program. And the planning committee really felt like that this wonderful cross-sector, splash of the community really needed to hear the voice of young people. And so these young people have watched the documentary Resilience, and I asked the committee if I could ask Dr. Sheila Peters to moderate. And I don't really need to read this because it's in my heart, but I'm going to read it so I don't go cray-cray. So, Dr. Sheila Peters is Associate Professor of Psychology at Fisk University. As much as anyone I have ever known, Sheila brings huge commitment, compassion, and grit to her decades of work with youth and with young adults. She is a healer, an educator. She is a champion of social justice, and she believes in the worth of every single person. She is my colleague, she is my friend, she is my sister in the struggle. She also serves as the team psychologist for the Tennessee Titans. Come on. Which I think we just got 2 new players. I'm not going to stumble over the positions because I'll get them wrong. I can't talk sports like Sheila can. But anyway, I consider Dr. Sheila Peters' core love. In my life, I'm grateful beyond measure for her, and I thank her for being here and for being a part of this. Come on up.
Good afternoon to everyone. I met Dr. Sue at a meeting. I didn't know her, but I didn't know why that woman kept talking so much. And we were sitting, a few people were in between the two of us, but we connected, and I am so grateful. As part of our discussion this afternoon is about toxic stress and in environments where we don't feel safe. There has never been a moment that I have not been in the light or the presence of Sue Ford White. And those of you that know her well know what I'm talking about. I always feel safe. It can be storming outside, but if she is somewhere near, I feel safe within that moment. And we all need people and places and spaces like that. So I thank my sister for that. I am so blessed to have had the opportunity to also begin to be in the light of 4 dynamic young people. And they are going to absolutely provide new insight for all of us. And so I'm going to ask them to come up to the stage because they're going to introduce themselves. And I've got to get out of the way so they can get around here. But yeah, give them a hand. These are some of the leaders in Nashville. And so I thank the planning committee. I thank you. As professionals, we often can get caught up in titles, but it's our young people. You know how hard it is for young people to sit up before a group of adults and tell us what we think we already know? And so we want to give them a safe space to be able to do that. So I'm going to ask them to share a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to get this party started. How about that? Okay?
Hi, I'm Casey Stroop. I'm a junior in high school, but technically I'm taking my classes at Nashville State Community College. I'm on the CNC Softball team at Oasis Center, which is how I found my way here. I'm also an intern with the American Civil Liberties Union in Tennessee. So great to see you. Appreciate it.
My name is Christian Tell. I'm finishing up at the Academy of Opera for school. I just had a newborn 2 months ago. Her name is so fresh. I'm currently working on trying to be a motivational speaker because things like this needs to happen at the forum. And just happy to be here.
Hello, my name is Princess Singh, and I am a junior at Newton High School. I am part of the MSA Action Team, which is a group of advocates of diverse high school students who advocate for transportation. And I'm very glad I'm here, guys. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alice Stack, and I am a senior at University School of Nashville. I'm on the Youth Advisory Health Board of Nashville, and we focus on issues that address teen health, with a special focus on tobacco prevention and distributing photo voice health equity projects. Some of those of which are active. Thank you so much for having me.
Wonderful. We are so excited that you are here. And part of what we are spending this time on is focused on a documentary known as Resilience. And Resilience is a documentary that many of you all have seen. We strongly encourage you and promote that you take the time to see it. It is groundbreaking in seeing how we can look as professionals at what we do every day and take a step back to see what is really going on. And so researchers, clinicians, were looking at phenomena that were happening in the helping profession. And we found researchers came up, you know, research isn't all bad. Sometimes we call it the paralysis of analysis, but it has a purpose. And so they identified what in our old terminology is what we call risk factors, but they are ACEs. And when we look at ACEs, we're talking about adverse childhood experiences. And so we see in this documentary how these researchers come to deal with this, how a dynamic pediatrician looks at her new practice and is able to step back and really see what the needs are. And for myself, as a professional just like the rest of you, part of, and I've shared with some of the young people, part of the challenge for us as professionals is that we're asked to communicate with one another, and that means that we label a lot of people. And we talk about in our terminology that certain folks have this and certain folks have that. ACEs is about what has happened to someone. It's about the toxic stress. And it's not just about age, because young people in their short lives can already have experienced a lot of things. But it's about changing our paradigm and looking at things different. Not what is wrong with someone, but what has happened to them in such a way that we can support and understand them through a different kind of lens. And so that's part of what we've looked at. But we've got 4 dynamic leaders that have a way of also looking at this too. So we encourage you to look at it, but we're going to open this up with kind of what was your reaction to the film itself? And whoever wants to start. Grab the mic, y'all.
Yeah, I found the film really interesting. It confirmed a lot of stuff that I had already seen in myself and in other people I know, just like how trauma really affects you decades and decades and decades after the fact. It's like a scar in your brain that really like changes your physiology for life. Like they say in the film, they make a really good point that like a little bit of anxiety is helpful because like that'll help you, say, jump out from in front of a truck that's coming in front of you. But feeling like there's constantly a truck about to hit you at all times, like that level of anxiety has a lot of negative effects on the body. And I don't know.
Thank you for sharing that. So if we're feeling like we're having to deal with that every day, that's what we're leading up, and very well said in terms of that toxic stress. So that by the time we see someone, it can be something very minor, but they're always on edge, so something simple can happen. And sometimes as professionals and teachers and parents and adults, we can see it as, what's wrong with that kid? Why are they reacting? Their reaction might be letting out toxic stress over multiple months and years of experiences, huh?
So after I watched the film, I was very shocked and a little bit sad in a way. When you watch the film, you see like the reality of someone like actually having to do with the impacts of ACEs. There are like buildings, there's 2 cities in California, and one has a little bit more crime rate, a little bit more poverty, and higher ACEs compared to another neighborhood. And just because of that, there's a huge gap of statistics of life expectancy. So this film is jam-packed with statistics, and that really did shock me in a way. And I got to see a lot of, people, you'll see a pediatrician, and you'll see students being impacted. And in a way, I was mind blown. It was a really great film.
I found some of what they discussed in the film to make intuitive sense to my understanding, not in a way that I would have been able ever to articulate, but that the body and mind are more connected than we generally think of them, made a lot of sense. And that if you're under constant stress and are having these traumatic experiences as a child, that would affect you as an adult makes sense. But that it would affect you as an adult in predicting a 20-year lower life expectancy, that was something that completely shocked me. Or that you would be twice as likely to have heart disease if you've had these adverse childhood experiences. That was a whole another level of connection, and it's scary, frankly, to think that experiences of the mind and what happens to you can have an effect not only on your mental state but your body. It seems like this problem is worse than imagined.
What I thought about the film was awesome. It was great. The thing about it, though, that made me upset was, where was this a long time ago? Where was this before we started having major tragedies in this world, dealing with young people, and what's going on now? And it's hard to look at it as a film that we can push on them now, because it's like they don't want us to learn this now. They're trying to stop us from improving ourselves, moving forward, because it's going to be 10 times harder to do so with the mindset that young people have now. The mindset of, we got to go out here and get it how we live, or it's the end of it. We have nothing else. People don't listen to us. People don't understand us. People don't know what we're going through. What we have to realize as youth at the same time is, y'all went through the same lifestyle we went through, but how can we fix it? And it's hard to do so when we try to talk about it when all we hear is, okay, leave what is said at school, at school. Leave what's said at home, at home. Leave your problems where they are. When all we want to really do is let it out. Because if we let it out, that builds anger, frustration, depression. It builds all these different emotions that causes us to act out, causes us to feel like we're not worth it, that we're not the people that we say we are. We're supposed to be the future of this world, but how can we be the future if we don't understand what happened in the past and what can we do to fix it? What's the next move?
Man, how powerful and profound what all of you all shared. And Chris, I'm going to pick up a little bit on what you were just saying, that when we don't guide individuals in how to let it out, it can come out in some shocking kind of ways, and then we label people again. We set up special kinds of programs to change your behavior with never understanding about those adverse experiences. Sometimes we want to see people where they are today without understanding what happened yesterday. And that makes it tough. How do we create safe spaces for people to really, well, let me change that up. What are some appropriate ways to let that stress out? What are some of the ways that you found or that you know of?
One thing personally for me was to go towards a safe haven. Somebody that cares. Somebody that's putting in their time and effort to speak to you about the matter. To try to fix it inside of the home, inside of the area that you live in, and also inside of school, the workplace. When a lot of kids get together, we think about the wrong things. Drugs, sex, the community being bad. But we can't fix that because we're too young. We don't really have that mindset. And the stage of from the age of 10 to 18, we can fix people's lives. But the only way you can do that is if you reach your hand out. Some people push back. They don't want it. They want to do it on their own. But if you keep pushing, if you keep driving, if you keep showing that you care, they will give in. Because I know I was like that. I had a hardened shell that I didn't want nobody in. But finally, somebody stepped up to the plate and showed me how to become a man and also showed me how to care. Because my heart was so broken and torn down because of my past, because of what I was seeing, because of the things that I was going through and living. And now I'm trying to better myself because I know that I'm working. And everything that I have done was working. Even if it's bad or good, it's going to help me throughout the journey.
So we have to be persistent in helping. And I think that's so important because when we are in helping professions, which everyone here is in helping professions, we want people to receive that. And I know that all of the different people at different stages in my life, and I am definitely still learning, but it's been the people that have been most stubborn and looked at me like, woman, what are you trying to do? And I could have easily given up, but they showed me how to be patient and to stay in that space with them and to be persistent. And so even though you put up that wall, somebody was willing to stay there and be with you, taking it down brick by brick. Anybody else want to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely relate to a lot of what Chris said. I think in my life, I don't know, I've had some experiences with some aces of my own. And like do that, I had to grow up very fast and I became very self-reliant. And so I assumed that any problem that I had, any like mental health issues that I was dealing with, I would have to deal with it by myself because it was my problem. And I don't know, I was very resistant to any sort of mental health care for like trauma I had been through. But I think, and I felt like, I don't know, I felt like kind of a lost cause. And I think, like you said, just like persistence from professionals just helps so much.
So our professionals gotta know they have to hang in there with us. When we talk about safe spaces, has art been important for any of you? Come on, talk. Come on, don't leave me out here hanging. Come on with it.
So I think spaces with good friends is important, and art I see as being a release for a lot of kids I know. Something I think we don't acknowledge that much in schools is that little children are not yet adept at compartmentalizing, nor should they be expected to be. And at school, like from day one, if you experience toxic stress, you're expected to go in and leave whatever was going on at home and just focus on it in school and math and the little assignments they have you do there. But little kids don't have the power yet to really isolate their thinking like that. And so to kind of, when we're teaching kids at school, to teach them as a whole person and help them learn interpersonal and personal skills and how to deal with that stress in addition to reading and math and curriculum, academic stuff, could help the individual in feeling less like it's a kind of battle of them against the world, and more like school is a place that can be supportive to them rather than just a place of academic curriculum, which I think is really what it should be. It should be a place of learning of the whole self, not just of academics.
Well, I like to agree with like everyone that has like stated. As a high school student, like as freshmen at my school, I was very shy and very scared of everyone. It was my new school, and it was considerably like supposed to be a really hard school, and I was very anxious and very shy, and I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to tell my parents at all, and I think as stress had developed, I didn't know who to talk to. Like I didn't know who am I going to talk to. Like sometimes there'd be breaking points where I was like, I don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. And for me, I think having actually maybe a physical safe space, I'd be really scared to talk to counselors or anyone like that, because then they'd be like, hey, you need to sign this for, your parents need to sign this so then I can listen to your problems. And for me, I'd like, no, I can't really tell my parents. That's really scary for me. And I think along with a physical space, I think extracurriculars are like things like outside of what she was saying, like reading and art. And for me, I think what helped me the most was actually joining extracurriculars and doing things like debate. And I'm past like being shy, and I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Just one more thing I wanted to add is that I feel like a lot of people don't see the importance in teaching children how to deal with their emotions, especially like in school and stuff. And even I've seen, if I remember correctly, in the Tennessee legislature recently, they tried to introduce a bill that would like ban social emotional learning in public schools. And, like when kids don't learn how to deal with their emotions in a constructive way, they will take it out in more risky behaviors. They will self-medicate. They will have like risky sex, all that stuff. And like I've had experience with that. So like, I don't know, like people don't really realize what's at stake.
So part of what you all are saying, and saying it so eloquently to us, is that school is more than just ABCs and math. It's about teaching young people how to cope and how to deal with certain situations, how to let go. You can't not just forget what happened at home, but you have to have a mechanism by which you can't go from one set of dysfunctional rules to another set of dysfunctional rules and be able to just handle it that way. And so we've got to be able to do that in some kind of way. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like school has gotten to a point where it's pretty divorced from the idea of the people we're teaching. And given how common a lot of the adverse childhood experiences appear to be, this is something that school needs to be addressing. Yeah.
I'm about to jump over here. Did you hear what she said? Our young people are telling us that we are treating people, and we're not even treating them like they're people. We're not listening to them. We act like we're hearing them. We're filling out the paperwork. We can document our professional involvement with them, but we're not honoring who they are. Did you hear that? Oh, I know this is a church. We're having church up in here. They are speaking the truth to us in that regard. And so that means that we got to transform that. And in addition to schools, though, it's a lot of our programs and a lot of other settings, too. Hayden, go ahead.
I think one of the barriers to treating this is that a lot of the populations of youth that are more likely to experience ACEs are already marginalized. It's already like LGBT youth like myself, youth of color, low-income youth, and so a lot of people aren't really well equipped to deal with that. Like how can, there's, like I have experienced trauma due to being transgender, but there's so many people who aren't equipped to deal with that, so what can I do?
We got to deal with all of that. We're talking about some of those safe spaces, and I know one of the things that we've talked about even before we got up here was about mental health and about how we can create spaces and places where people can deal with that. How do you see that? I mean, how do you see your peers approaching mental health? Is it good enough to have a counselor, or are there different ways in which we can open up those spaces for young folks?
Look at it in a good perspective. When you see a child act out, you would probably say that there's something wrong with him mentally, or that he's going through something so bad that he needs medication, that he has to have some type of system that all it does is push back the real problem. All it's doing is putting a screen up and not actually solving the problem at all. And the only way to fix that is if you ask the child, what's wrong? What's going on with you? How can I give you some type of help that you need, or can I help you in any type of way? If you see that there's something wrong with the child, why not ask what's going on in the first place? And a lot of us don't do it because we say that it's not our problem. We say that he'll be okay, she'll be okay. We'll say that, okay, it may be a physical thing, as in for women. It might be that she's on her period. Or for the guy, that maybe he's acting out because, he's not getting his way in a certain area. But a lot of times we have to understand that a lot of problems come from home. It comes from our environment. And the only way we can stop it is if we get to the source at hand. And if we can't get to the source, we follow behind a different source and find out what the root is of all the problems in the first place. Because you have to understand, when we talk about children growing up, kids can understand when their parents is arguing at a young age, at infants. And that can affect them as they grow older. A lot of people say, oh, well, it's just a baby, they are acting out because it is that. No. There's a reason why it's acting out. If you don't have that good environment around your child, it's going to act out. And when it gets older, it's going to understand at a reasonable age and be like, well, you know, my mom and dad is fighting a lot and it's affecting me because I'm scared. I don't know what to do. What if my dad hits my mom? What if my mom hits my dad? What if somebody end up going to jail or somebody end up dead? Why wait until that happens? Why not stop it right before it happens? Because when you look at it, if somebody's in kindergarten and they say, you know, draw a picture, have free time, and you see the drawing and you just look at it, you take your time and really look at it, and it might be something that you would never think a child would draw. And all you do is ask yourself, why? Why is this happening to this child? This sweet, innocent child, why is it happening? It should not be going through this at this age. And the only way we can fix it is if we catch it on time. Because then we have to wait for the moment that it turns 16, 17, 18, and those are the moments when it's being able to get sent to juvenile, get sent to jail. And then we be brought as statistics. Oh, well, he's acting up, he's gonna end up in jail anyway. He's acting up, he's gonna end up 6 feet under anyway. But why wait?
I think there's a general mentality that leaders are these kind of glorious, perfect people, the kind of student council president type. And I think this is a kind of a flawed mentality because the people who I've drawn most inspiration from in my own life, and I think other people as well, are imperfect. And part of what makes what they say so powerful is that it's authentic, it's real, it's coming from their own struggles. And I think enabling youth to realize that they can be real leaders, not only if they've had these things happen to them, but maybe because these things happen to them, make them more validated to speak about them, is something that's really big. And like, I think the way we think about leaders should be less about like people who are already so good that they can talk to us, and more that people who have been resilient and have been able to come back from their struggles, they're the ones who have more to teach us.
You all are making my work so easy. Oh, it's easy.
I really agree with what Ella said. Like, in my own life, I just think, like, I've just seen, like, the importance of mentorship for youth, and, like, for youth to see people who are like them and who have gone through the same experiences as them, who then go on to be, like, successful, happy adults. Like, that makes more of an impact than people realize, I think. Just, like, knowing that there, like, is hope for you as a child. I don't know. It's really important to people. It's really important to me.
You all have said it in lots of different ways, but I am, as I told you, I'm a dinosaur. So, but as long as I stay in this field, I have to be open enough to understand. And they're labels, millennials, and, you know, I'm a baby boomer and all of that, but that doesn't really matter. But you all are so in tune with what is happening with your peers. What are we missing with this generation in terms of connecting? What can you as youth leaders do with our support to connect to the very people that you say, because they're resilient, they have a voice and they can teach us? But if I come up, it's just an old middle-aged woman coming up, and all they're gonna see is a dinosaur. Help me out. I don't see a dinosaur.
The way that you can basically fix the problem is the way you present it. Because a lot of times when we are presented like with a documentary, most of us as youth will actually look at it and be like, yes, that's interesting. We can get with that program. We can help out with that. But others will be like, what is this? What are we watching? I don't even want to watch this no more. Man, turn this off or let me walk out or something. It's a mindset because of what we have been through. A lot of people get used to seeing things out there on the streets and out there on movies and, you know, realizing that some of it is real life, some of it is fake. So if we see in your hearts that what you're doing is real, we're gonna push towards it. But if we can tell that what you're doing is just fake, that you're not really caring, that you're not really trying to push towards the goodness of us, why put in our efforts? Why try to go after the same goals you're going after? How are we gonna fix ourselves if you can't even help us, if you don't know what to do? And the only way you'll know how is if you look at different options, different ways. Being as a group can fix a lot. Not one or two people can fix an entire community. It has to be a group thing, a community thing. And when you sit down and you ask people, what can we do? Have a young person right there beside you. Because the only way you can fix young people is if you have a young leader helping you along. Because yes, y'all old. Y'all wiser. Y'all have more wisdom. But I know for me as a child, I grew around a lot of, as they say, old heads back in the day. I love wisdom. I love knowledge. I love just hearing about certain things that can be fixed. And how can I help? And as I got older, I started looking at my peers and being like, I know what you're going through. I done been through it. And if I haven't been through it, I done heard about it. So I know how to fix it. But I can't be the only one trying to push towards it. You have to put in some type of effort. Because without two people giving effort, it's never going to be complete. It's going to be incomplete. And how are you going to build an empire without everybody working with their part?
There are a lot of emergencies that go around in society that aren't stigmatized. Fires, house fires are not stigmatized, but there's an institutional response whenever there's a fire. And there's education in advance that we've been learning from an early age, like stop, drop, and roll, and call 911. And there's really so little of that for traumatic stress and trauma. There is a 911 alternative, but people don't know about it as much, and I think. I don't know where, we see these red fire trucks everywhere. I don't know where the red fire trucks are for mental health, though I think there should be them, because it's basically an inner fire. Destigmatizing, the destigmatization of mental health goes in line with the accessibility, like making, if we as a public, if the public makes help for trauma and mental health more public, more visible, more accessible, and more well-known. With that, we go this kind of curtain that seems to go around, like, what do you do if you're depressed, or what do you do if you've had these bad experiences that continue to affect you every day? And it could open, if we open up that curtain and kind of use this fire station model of bringing it into the public in the same way fires are, I think it could gain a lot of insight into the problem.
Yeah, I think, like you said, just like the stigma is so pervasive that so many people will go their entire lives dealing with trauma and toxic stress and never talk about it once. You know, I went like 16 years without ever talking about like trauma I had dealt with because I thought it was something I would just get over, but that did not happen. And so I was like, wow, if I want to, I just had to realize by myself, if I want to ever be able to move on in my life and do the things I want to accomplish, then I have to deal with this. And I had never really had any adult during my childhood who kind of like saw the warning signs that I had been dealing with something, and they never met me where I was at. So, like, I had to be proactive in trying to get help, and a lot of people aren't going to do that. So I think, like, connecting youth with, like, professionals who truly do care about them and will meet them where they're at is really important.
And some of that means that as professionals, we can't be in our physical offices the way that sometimes we are. We've got to be out, and we've got to connect with youth where they are too. That our safe spaces aren't defined just by four walls where some professional is sitting there behind a desk. And so because I'm sitting behind a desk and I might have the credentials, doesn't mean that's the way I'm gonna reach out to somebody.
I think having that close relationship with youth leaders is very important for a young person. I think that programs are like, like if someone has an issue, a generalized solution is like, oh, maybe this child needs this program or this child needs this program. But I think that having that human relationship with that person is very vital for someone. Recognizing and addressing this issue at a young age is very important. A lot of these ACEs that we are seeing are more in the film are physically seen at the age of middle school. We need to address this far more, like elementary, kindergarten. We need to recognize these problems. And again, I think building relationships with youth leaders that we see as role models, as people, instead of, oh, this child needs this program, let's give this child tons of programs and this child will end up okay. I think human contact and relationships are so important for the development of a human person.
You all are really educating us. We've got a few minutes left. So I want to give you an opportunity to think of, because you've all prepared in lots of different ways to be able to speak to this. So if you want to think about some closing remarks, I'm going to give you a moment. What do you want to say to everybody? But I want to say this before you share. I want to thank my higher power for each one of you, for the courage to not only be who you are, but to say some things to us. It's going to take us weeks and months to process what you have said. I feel a whole lot better about the world right now. And yet I know that to bring the four of you into this room and to help to educate us, we've got to do a better job. So it's not just 4, but it's 4 times 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. And that young people feel empowered and kids feel empowered. And those same little kids that so many of you resonated to, for those of you that haven't seen Resilience, where kids are being taught how to treat each other in the classroom, how to respect each other. And that's part of what we have to do. But I'm better today because I got to meet you. I'm better. I'm confident of that. So let's close out. Who's going first? I'm going to give you my mic.
One thing that I remembered in the movie was, it's not just kids that still go through it. It's adults too. And a lot of things that we don't understand is, as adults, they try to handle their problems by their own, because you look at it, adults are there to make a better place for kids. They're there to be an idol, especially if it's your mother and dad. I mean, if you think about it, a lot of times when we think about our past, the things that kids go through, we went through ourselves. Sexual abuse, abandonment, drug abuse, physical abuse. And it's hard to process as adults, because it's like, how can I talk about this? I'm grown. I should keep this to myself. But how are you going to fix what's going on with the youth if you're scared to say it yourself? And a lot of times the main word is anxiety. You're scared. You don't understand how. And the only way you can fix it is if you find help. There should be groups there just to help y'all out, so once y'all get to the homes, y'all can help us out.
I don't know. Y'all probably know this pretty well already since this is your job, but I just think a lot of people, including myself, are just really shocked by the frequency at which people experience traumatic events as children. It's way more than a lot of people realize. And the vast majority of people who go through these experiences will not talk about it unless you ask them. You know, like they said in the movie, like one of the doctors that started researching this, he started noticing a pattern in patients that were dealing with obesity. And he says that he started asking all of his patients if they had been sexually assaulted. And 55% of his patients dealing with obesity had been assaulted as children and never brought it up until he asked them. So people will go their whole lives just like hiding trauma until someone asks them about it.
So, the final thing I would like to say is putting institutions in place to help people who have had traumatic experiences is important for those people, but it also boosts the whole community and everyone. If you provide healthy options for kids who have, like, I don't know, heart problems or whatever, like, that's good, like, good, you're doing that. But it also, like, everyone should be eating healthy. Maybe that isn't the best metaphor, but it's fun. And if we amplify the amount with which we kind of let people talk about this in supportive environments in schools, and just bring in more support for kids who have experienced ACEs, it's also helping everybody. Everybody who's experienced little things to medium things, it's helping everybody. And just creating a greater establishment to help these people is really the important thing.
So I wanted to say for like my last few words that toxic stress and these ACEs are they're currently happening and will continue to happen in the status quo. And I think that addressing the problem and doing little things to a child and having that relationship with that person and being that role model, I think even the little things, I think, are very important to that child's health. And I think that, again, having that close relationship, trying to help a child at a young age, and maybe from that child you learn something too. Maybe when you help that child, you yourself, Olivia, you look at your past and you're like, wow, like I really look into myself with this child. Does that make sense? Like you see yourself in that child, and I think that even the little things. You may not, like, I could be like, hey guys, you guys should make a program and help these children, but I think doing these little things are very important, and it's really been a pleasure. Thank you.
And certainly open up discussion with children and youth. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much.
So, I thank my sister in the struggle. You are such an inspiration. And you young people are radiant gifts. You have blessed us today. Thank you so much. Deep bow. We have gone. I feel like we have gone to church today, folks. So, okay, this is so good. We have our last opportunity for a workshop today. So I'm going to do this very fast. So Kelly Evans, if you want to experience the Trauma Smart Building Resiliency in Communities, her session is here. And if you stay in here, what's helpful is if you can come forward and come to the center. My dear friend, Judge Sheila Calloway, Shiro. She's in the house. She's in the house. I love you so much. Yes. Okay, so Judge Sheila Calloway and Catherine Steinbeck are here to talk about how all these different ways that the Davidson County Juvenile Court has been transformed, and they're wonderful. Their breakout session is going to be in the chapel, which is through the doors and to the left. And I believe, who is leading them? Raise your hand if you're leading that group out. Who is it? Is it, okay, so it's Amanda? Okay, Amanda with the red coat. And there'll be a little pause here. So for those of you who know me, I have a bumper sticker on the back of my car that says love wins. My next bumper sticker is going to say control is an illusion. But my third bumper sticker is going to say it's okay to need help and it's okay to get help. Were these young people just so wise about all that? Destigmatization. Okay, so our third breakout is Building Healthy Brains, the Role of Life Experience in Shaping Brain Development, presented by Alex Batts, and that is going to be downstairs in classroom 1, and Jennifer is going to take you down. If you can use the stairs, that's awesome, and if you need to use the elevator, it's to the left across from the chapel. And our fourth workshop is moving the needle toward ACEs-informed school culture and practices in Metro Nashville Public Schools. And I did not give a shout out, which I should have, to the principal at Fall Hamilton Elementary, who is Matthew Portell. He and Mary Cinnabori are presenting downstairs, the lower level in the well. And someone is going to be taking you downstairs, but it's not Amanda. Thank you. We'll be back here in about an hour. Thank you and enjoy. How many rewards have there been for us and for our work and for inspiration and encouragement? I feel so hopeful today. So before I introduce our final speaker, which I'm thrilled to do, a lot of people were talking about, okay, how do I stage a viewing of Resilience, the documentary? So Kristen Rector said they need to call or email me at PCAT. So her email is Kristen, Kristen .Rector, RECTER, at PCAT.org. So it's a great documentary, and so please reach out to Kristen. And again, if you didn't sign up front when you came in, please do that so that we can keep in touch with you. We're in the midst of a movement, ACE Nashville, working together and doing great work. So I'm thrilled to introduce Kristen Simpson-Zach, and you probably feel like you're drinking out of a fire hydrant, because you're brand new to Nashville and you have a very important position in the mayor's office. So Kristen, she is the brand new senior advisor of health and wellness policy to Mayor Megan Barry. You come to us from New York City. You have nearly 20 years of experience in public policy and in public health and all of that, and a tremendous amount of experience in aging and oversight of 300 programs meeting the needs of older adults through meals, socialization, health, wellness support, social services, and transportation. The whole ball of wax. And so I've recently this week sat in a meeting with you, and I watched you closely because you are a quick study and you track social and political cues across the room. And we are so happy to have you in Nashville, and we welcome you. This is, I believe, her first speaking engagement in Nashville, possibly. So we welcome you to Nashville. This is a tremendously generous and inspired city, and you're right on time. We are so happy to have you. Please come up.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And I just really want to say thank you to Sue, because she has this unique way, and I've been to 2 meetings with her now, of just making you feel like so much better and more comfortable than you could ever feel, and more empowered. And so, because I was a little nervous. So I was a little bit nervous. But, you know, my nerves started to melt away once I saw the panel of kids up here, because I figured, oh God, I did not have that when I was 16 years old, and if at all. And if they can do that, then certainly I can do this. But I'm really pleased to be here today on behalf of Mayor Megan Barry, and thank you so much for the introduction. I also want to just thank Dr. Renee Boynton-Jarrett for delivering her keynote this morning, and Dr. Frida Outlaw, who's our chair of our Healthy Nashville Leadership Council. Dr. Paul, I don't know if he's still here, the director of the Metro Public Health Department, and of course Sue Fort White for emceeing the event, and all of our workshop speakers today. I had the chance to sit in on the workshop that the Metro Public Schools put together, and the last one with Judge Calloway, and gosh, I was completely blown away by Judge Calloway, so I'm going to have to get to know her more. Oh, my gosh. So I just want to introduce myself. My name's Kristen Zach. I'm really happy to be here in my brand new role. You've caught me in my second week living and working in Nashville. I got here on Easter Sunday, moved into my apartment, started the next day. So I'm brand new. I'm the new senior advisor for health and wellness policy for Mayor Barry. I'm going to admit I am not an expert on this subject that we are talking about today, because I kind of come from the other end of the age spectrum. I spent most of my career working in New York City government, and most recently, the past 9 years at the New York City Department for the Aging. I was a deputy assistant commissioner there, and I had oversight over about 300 programs that were senior centers, transportation programs, social service programs for older adults. But I will say that what we have in common is that we looked at everything that we did from a public health lens, and our whole mission was to empower older adults to live as healthily as they could and stay in the community and connected for as long as possible and out of institutions. So that was our whole mission. We did not get involved in institutional care. Our role was to keep them in the community and safe and healthy. So empowering our youth is to live as healthily and productive as they possibly can is near and dear to the heart of Mayor Barry, and it informs all that we do in this administration. I watched the footage from the last year's summit, and I saw how we sort of introduced the community to the science of adverse childhood experiences, and now we're working to build on that momentum to mobilize around intervention strategies and collective impact. So where are we now? What have we accomplished since last year in this journey towards preventing and mitigating the impact of adverse childhood experiences so that all of Nashville's children are given the opportunity to thrive? I've heard the mayor more than once now use a phrase that I'm going to try to use and keep in my mind to inform all that I do as part of this team, and that is, how do we move from conflict to conversation to action? Because sometimes we're really good at the recognizing the conflict, the conversation, and then we're not always good at the action part. So that's what we're here to talk about today. I want to mention a few things that the mayor and the administration has committed to on the action front to help us move the needle towards our goal of supporting our children to develop resiliency. First of all, there was a real recognition in the mayor's office that there needed to be a point person to kind of proactively spearhead and coordinate the mayor's efforts in promoting health and wellness policy in Nashville, and that's how you got me. And even more important to the work around ACEs, I would say, is that Metro made a commitment to take a leadership role in the ACEs work among all Metro departments and also in the wider community by appointing Jennifer Trail, there she is, as the ACEs prevention coordinator at the Metro Health Department. So I look forward to working with her. I was doing some research on ACEs because I told you I'm not an expert on this topic. And I came across a lecture from a professor of clinical mental health counseling at the University of Memphis. And it really stuck with me. And it was a very simple premise, but the lecture was about combating adverse childhood experiences through resilience-based interventions. And her big takeaway was that you treat ACEs through relationships. Meaning fostering healthy attachments, that's what promotes resiliency and healing. And it seems so simple, but in everything that I've heard today, that's really what it's all about. You may know that Mayor Berry places tremendous value on investing in our children and youth, and she believes that our future hinges on that investment. Getting that job, that first meaningful opportunity for mentorship, those first professional relationships, that can make a real difference in helping our youth develop the resiliency that they need to overcome adverse childhood experiences. This is why Mayor Berry has pursued a laser-like vision on the Opportunity Now program, which is a major initiative based on the recommendations for the Mayor's Youth Violence Summit. And this summer, we're going to have close to, hopefully right at, 10,000 Nashville youth that will be employed by this initiative. It's not just employment, it involves wraparound services that help them to develop the soft employment skills that they need, the learning, the mentoring, and the resources to move towards financial empowerment. But we know that this is about much more than helping youth become financially independent. This is about showing them that their government and their community places a value on their future and about introducing them to those important first relationships that will help them develop a sense of purpose and belonging. So jobs create opportunity, and opportunity creates hope. And then there's all the work that all of you are doing throughout our community, increasing trauma-informed training, practice, and programming in schools, childcare, and throughout the healthcare and behavioral healthcare network. We have many people here who are who are at the forefront of the strategies in our school system to practice trauma-informed teaching and care and provide the professional development tools needed to promote better awareness of the impact of ACEs on neurological development and school success. And Mayor Berry is also committed to improving access to high-quality pre-K in our school system and beyond so that these important interventions can start as early as possible in our school system. I'm also really excited and hopeful about other promising initiatives that I learned about through the state's Building Strong Brains ACEs initiative, including the Infant Court Project, hosted by Judge Sheila Calloway, Belmont University's Educating Trauma-Informed Professionals Initiative, Vanderbilt's Mitigating ACEs in Pediatric Primary Care Initiative. And I'm hopeful because it seems like we really have the right people at the table right now, and we're moving in the right direction towards preventing and mitigating ACEs in the earliest years through adolescence. And for that, I would like to thank you all for all of your work. So as you probably know, Mayor Berry focuses a great deal of energy on economic development. And, well, the future of this city and its people really depends on our ability to help foster the health and well-being of the next generation of Nashvillians. And if we invest wisely in our children and families, this next generation is going to pay us back in a lifetime of productivity and responsible citizenship. So I'd like to ask everyone here to think about what they can do in the next year to contribute to a more resilient, more trauma-informed city. One thing, if you're not already involved, please consider participating in ACE Nashville, and I'm really looking forward to participating in that, and I'd encourage everybody to join that collaborative. This is really the collective effort that's dedicated to this issue in our city, and together I really believe that we can link and leverage our resources to create a more resilient Nashville thank you again for being here today and for the critical role that you're playing in supporting Nashville's children and families. Thank you.